Welcome to the Bloom Where You're Planted podcast from Never Too Late Cafe. I'm your host, Laura Womack. Each week, we sit down for a chat with someone just like you, someone who had an idea, a passion, a dream, or sometimes just a thought, and planted that seed, watched it grow into something they wanted to share with the world. If you have an idea for a topic or someone that would be a guest for the Bloom Where You're Planted podcast, feel free to reach out to us on Facebook, where you can join our Never Too Late Cafe Facebook group. We'd love to hear from you. I have a very special guest with me today, and that is James B. Wells. Hi, James. How are you?
Hey, Laura. I'm doing great. Glad to be on your podcast.
Well, thanks for being here. Let's start of where you are currently living.
My wife and I currently reside in South Fayette County, which is Lexington, Kentucky. It's a consolidated city-county government. And we live on a little tiny 10.5-acre farm right on the banks of the Kentucky River on the Kentucky River Palisades. And we love it here. Been here 30 years.
Wow. So is that where you're from originally?
No, I was raised an Army brat, and most of my childhood and teenage years were near Atlanta, Georgia, where I met my wife. And but my roots go back to Southern Ohio. Both my parents were from the Portsmouth area. My grandfather from New Boston, and my parents from Menford. And I've spent some time there as well. So I like to consider myself a Buckeye also.
So let's just jump right into your story. I can say when I was looking over some of my notes of all that you've done, it's extensive. So I'm going to ask about your teaching. Can you tell us about your teaching experience and how that came about?
Well, I didn't plan on becoming a teacher. When I was working on my undergraduate degree, I joined the Army Reserve and did ROTC to help pay the bills. I was already married and had a child when I started my college education, and part of my duties involved training at the U.S. Army Reserve Center at Fort Hays, Columbus, Ohio. And so here I am, like a platoon leader in my 20s, and my platoon is a bunch of older Vietnam veterans, and I'm having to do lesson plans and such, and train them. And that's when I kind of first fell in love with teaching, I think. As you probably know from my website, I while I was working on my undergraduate degree, I also worked at the super maximum security prison in Lucasville, Ohio, Southern Ohio Correctional Facility. And while I was there, I was working on my undergraduate degree at OU Athens, but I took classes in Portsmouth at Shawnee University and at Marshall and Huntington, and as well as Athens. And after I got my undergraduate degree, I left Southern Ohio to get my master's in criminal justice at Georgia State University, and later my PhD in research, measurement, and statistics there. And of course, when you're a graduate student, one thing you have to do is teach classes and do research. And my PhD program required a residency where you had to live and work at the university 20 hours a day. But I fell in love with teaching, and my first teaching job was at North Georgia College, north of Atlanta. And then I took an offer at Eastern Kentucky University in Richmond, Kentucky. And I started there January 1995. And have been there ever since, and I really love what I do. I can't believe they actually pay me to do this work.
Well, that's wonderful. So what are you currently teaching then?
Okay, right now I'm currently teaching classes students fear the most: criminal justice data analysis or statistics. I teach a few sections of that every semester. It's one of the few required courses a degree in criminal justice requires. I also teach a course in corrections, introduction to corrections, which I'm well qualified to teach, I believe. uh, and I've taught research methods in the past, and as well as statistics at the graduate and undergraduate level. And I've also taught a whistleblowing in organizations class at the undergraduate and graduate level. So,
Really? I've never heard of that course.
oh,
I
it's
didn't know you,
it's
I
growing in
didn't know you could teach.
popularity.
Pardon?
Yeah.
It popular, huh?
Whistleblowing is a topic that's growing in popularity.
Oh
It's
my.
it's something all of us need to be familiar with, and in terms of making everything better for us. And you should know what protections you have, should you decide to reveal some wrongdoing occurring in your workplace or whatever. So I'm not teaching those classes right now, but I'll go ahead and do a little pitch. I believe I feel obligated to educate others about whistleblowing. So each morning I tweet a whistleblowing fact on Twitter. I'm up to 104, I think. Whistleblowing fact 104. And if anybody wants to follow me, my handle is at James Wells B2, B as in boy.
Wow. That's very interesting. Well, not, I mean, everything that I've read already. So, and just adds to more things that you do. So you went back for a certificate in writing at not long ago or a few years ago or so.
Yeah, actually, maybe I should back up a little bit, but about 25 years after my father was killed in Vietnam, I found over 400 letters he had written my mother over his military and State Department career. And up until finding the letters, my family and I believed what the government had told us, that he was the only passenger in a civilian plane that was shot down by communist small arms fire as it was landing at a rural airstrip. And when I found the letters, I didn't know the man. I was 9 years old when he was killed. And so I wanted to know the man. So I read the letters, and it took years for me to transcribe the letters. Some of them had suffered from mold and mildew damage, and he'd written with a fountain pen in a lot of them, and the ink had bled through both sides. And it took 20 years to transcribe all 400 letters.
Wow.
But I'm slowly realizing that my father, throughout his military and State Department career, was a very moral, righteous, and religious man who was very outspoken and critical of others not doing their job as they should. And at first, I thought about just publishing the letters by themselves. But then as I came to know my father, and I came to realize, well, maybe he's making enemies, because, I have evidence he was a whistleblower throughout his career. So on a whim, I accompanied my wife on her annual trip to Washington, D.C. She's part of her duties with the organization she works for is to lobby for the apartment industry for Central Kentucky. So she meets with all three congressional representatives from Kentucky every March. So on a whim, I decided to accompany her, because the National Archives in College Park, Maryland is just a train ride away, like an hour away. And that first trip in 2013, I'm looking at declassified secret and top secret documents. And that's when I first discovered what we were told was not true. And to make a long story short, after making 6 trips to the National Archives and multiple trips to 4 other archives in the U.S. and 2 in Vietnam, and doing lots of field research in both the U.S. and Vietnam, interviewing former American veterans, CIA, State Department representatives, South Vietnamese Army, even former communist fighters, even Vietnamese civilians who witnessed the crash of my father's plane. I now have corroborating evidence from multiple sources confirming that the government lied to us and that there was a cover-up. So my goal over I started writing a book in 2012, and I was taking classes at the Carnegie Center in Lexington. They offer like tutoring and private writing classes and workshops and such. And when they decided to come out with like a certificate to get like to graduate from their author academy, it was quite expensive. And then I realized, oh, wait a minute, I teach at a university and I can get an accredited MFA in creative writing degree free.
Oh.
So that's what I started that in 2015. And of course, it took me a long time, just taking it primarily 1 course a semester because I'm working and teaching a full-time job. I did a lot of consulting work, and I have a little farm to manage. And I actually didn't finish my thesis and graduate till last summer. So I now have 5 degrees. and an MFA.
I said you were interesting.
Well,
let's say this. At this point, you are still in process of your book, so we're not going to ask you to reveal anything like research or where you're currently at or any of those details, because those I'm sure you want to keep under wraps as you're developing your book, correct?
That's fine. Yes, that's perfectly fine.
And that's quite understandable, and especially given the nature of the content. Wow, you are definitely a researcher to unbelievable degree. So is your blog that you do, does it have anything to do with the concept that you're doing with the book and your stories that you've started to develop because of your research on this?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. I do have a website. It's jamesbwells.com. And at my website, you can learn a lot more about me and my story. I've had excerpts from my work on my memoir published in a half a dozen literary journals. So if your listeners want to know a little bit about my story, they can read some of these published essays that have been published, as well as look at some presentations I've conducted and interviews and such. And I also have some open mics that I've done there as well at different localities. And I believe I also have a trailer. I'm fascinated with book trailers. I got to work on a couple of book trailers. So I actually have the most recent version of my book trailer on my blog.
Very interesting. So on your webpage, there is the link. I mean, the link where you can get your blog and see all of your entries.
Yeah. And
Okay.
I encourage everybody to follow me. There's a little place where you can click follow. So,
of course.
And there's also
like,
link,
comment, and follow.
right. And there's links. You can click on links to my Twitter feed as well as both of my Facebook profiles and LinkedIn as well. So I'm eager to talk to people who are interested in my story or perhaps have been in a similar situation, and so I'm there for people if they want to correspond with me.
So you've written other things sort of off topic from what we're currently talking about, but in your work in general, you have developed tools that's been used for a lot of different I don't know if I would say organizations, but sort of evaluation sort of tools. And
Mm-hmm.
can you tell some more about that? Because
Yeah,
there's a whole list. There's a list of things that you've done. So I'm like,
yeah, and there's a reason for all that, and I'll take you back
okay.
to my roots in Southern Ohio. But I was a correctional officer at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility, and it was the early '80s, and you know, and Lucasville has a tough reputation, always has, and even to this day does so. As you probably know, being from that area, one of the longest and deadliest prison riots in U.S. history occurred there in 1993. But I remember working there and thinking, wow, so much we could do so much more to improve the living environment of inmates and working environment of staff here. So after getting my actually while working on my master's, I got my first grant that looked at the corrections, and most of my academic research career has been focused on improving the working environments that correctional staff work in and the living environments that inmates live in, and making it safer. If you notice from my Vita, my resume, that I've done a lot of PREA work, Prison Rape Elimination Act work, where we try to educate others, staff and inmates, about the importance of not only physical safety but sexual safety as well. And a lot of that research has focused on female as well as male inmates. So I like to think that as a result of what I experienced at Lucasville, it had a huge impact on what I wanted to do with my career. And I like to think that myself, together with others I've worked with, have made a positive impact on improving the working and living environments that our correctional institutions have to offer.
So some of those were tools that they, you create them as part of your job, and then you offer them to other facilities and things like that.
Yeah. So one thing we did was develop for the National Institute of Corrections the Women's Correctional Safety Skills Toolkit.
Mm-hmm.
And this is based upon a survey that we spent years developing it. We interviewed and surveyed thousands of inmates and interviewed hundreds of staff, and based upon all the feedback we got, we developed a multi-dimensional survey tool that allows correctional authorities to tap the temperature of their institution in terms of physical safety and sexual safety. And we got another award from the National Institute of Corrections to make a film about that, where we actually went to a real facility, and I was both a producer and a director, but we hired some professional actors, and we demonstrated in the film real life situations that occur in a correctional institution, and how staff can react to that, and use our survey tool to tap the temperature and make an assessment. And our film even includes, all right, based upon the temperature you got, what do you do? What recommendations can we give you in terms of how to make your facility safer? And so we worked on that a few years, but the National Institute of Corrections does have it, and it should be available to any correctional institutions wanting to take advantage of it.
That is amazing. And I didn't even know that you had a film and that you had directed, and your list goes on. So, and you have written books, and I see in a notation here, author of books, chapters and articles, and many technical reports. So are these all about similar topics in the correctional?
Yeah, pretty much all of them. Myself and Barbara Owen, a renowned female criminologist of international fame, she and I did a lot of the Prison Rape Elimination Act work involving women, and based upon our years of research, wrote a book called In Search of Safety. It's like an academic monograph that's used by not only correctional institutions and agencies and such, but also academic programs. It's more suited to like graduate programs of study. But over the years, I've also contributed chapters to other books and such, and published lots of peer-reviewed articles in academic literary journals about most of them about improving correctional safety, improving the environment of correctional institutions, and how to just make facilities safer for both staff and inmates. Most of it's revolved around that.
When I first met you, I want to say that we did meet at an artist gathering last year, and I only knew your story about what you were working on about your dad's history. And now this expanded version of you is all that you've done in a different realm, but yet they're all research, and it's all writing and presenting. And now I'm learning film. So it's amazing how much you've done. So I'm going to ask you, and you do some readings, and that I'm assuming is literary readings of maybe parts of what you're doing with your current book.
Yeah. I try to do an open mic every month or so in some venue or another, and it's usually about something I've written in the past or something I've just written. But I enjoy doing that, and I think I'll be doing another one next month in Lexington. But yeah, I plan on retiring hopefully at the end of this academic year or calendar year, and I want to take advantage of the expanding art and literary scene in Portsmouth. I've been trying to keep up with some of that, especially from your Facebook page, and it's kind of exciting. I want to get involved in more of that.
So how do you find the ones currently that you are presenting at and doing your readings at?
Well, I guess just networking with other authors and writers and such. But I'm with the Bluegrass. I graduated with the Bluegrass Writer Studio at EKU, and we do open mics, and Lexington has a great reputation for writing. We're referred to as the Athens of the West. But we have open mics here at pubs and bars. The public library does an open mic every month. Lagar Cafe does one every month. It's an artist studio where the one of the artists there hosts an open mic event every month. And then if you, just get on Facebook or wherever, you can hear about other ones popping up all over. A lot of public libraries are doing open mics now.
Oh, I know that it is more popular, it seems, than what it was maybe several years ago. And that's just what I'm experiencing, and I'm hearing more about it than what I did several years ago. Could be they've always been there and I'm just hearing about it. But so with your farm, is there anything that you want to share about your 10-acre farm? Anything that pops out that, like, hey, this is part of my story too?
Well, I probably do it for therapeutic reasons more than anything, but I've always been an avid organic gardener. I think my mother was probably one of the first organic gardeners. I remember as a young teenager looking at her organic gardening subscriptions, But I've always enjoyed gardening, and I have a large garden here on our farm, and I've actually added a second garden, and I'll be building a high tunnel greenhouse this spring. Just a small one, 15 by 48, but look forward to getting that built and growing, cool season vegetables and such. I have a lot of blueberry beds. We have a lot of success with blueberries. I have an orchard, but I haven't really paid enough attention to it. I've just been too busy to, but I'd like to do a better job with that. And I also keep bees. And my love of my love of beekeeping goes back to a gentleman in Southern Ohio. I was in my early 20s and needed some extra income, and I helped. His name is Carl Race. He's deceased now, but he was from Menford, Ohio, but very successful beekeeper. He had like 800 hives all over Southern Ohio, and some years he would sell a tractor trailer load of honey in addition to supplying all his regular customers. But pretty much ever since then, I've always had a few beehives. And so I have, I think, about 15 now, and look forward to expanding my apiary. That's what you call beehives.
Your what?
Apiary. APIARY. And producing more honey. And what we do give away and sell is quite popular. I have some customers who in the past have bought, well, one has bought 65 pounds a year from me.
But, oh my goodness.
But I really enjoy it, and it's very healthy for you too.
Oh, there's a big market for local honey, especially with allergies. That's, some of their natural cures or treatments, whatever you want to call them, really stress local. And that makes a lot of sense when you think of allergies because of your environment of where you're exposed to and things. I want to go back just a second. When you said something about your tunnel and it's just a small one, that doesn't sound small to me.
40. I think it's 15 by 40. I think it's the smallest size, kit size you can get, I think.
40 sounds like long.
And I also, before I even went to college, I went to woodworking school, and I was a self-employed carpenter and cabinet maker, and I haven't done as much as that as I'd like to throughout my academic career. A project here and there, but once I retire, I want to get more involved in that as well.
Mm. And I'm going to share that your picture has you with a particular car, and I bet there is a story about this car.
There is a story. uh, well, my mother believed in driving huge Pontiac station wagons, tanks, uh, but when it was time for her to get a new station wagon, I was 16 years old, and I went with her to the Pontiac dealer, and I talked her into buying a 1972 Pontiac Grand Prix, which, by the way, is referred to as the original DeLorean. John DeLorean designed the 71-72 Pontiac Grand Prix while working for GM. Now, my mother didn't drive that much, so I got to drive it to high school and such, and fell in love with the car. And she loved it too, and she never wanted to get rid of it. And when she developed dementia and started getting lost driving, we took the car away from her, and I've had it ever since, and it's pretty much original. I had a paint job put on it 30 years ago, and most of the interior redone, and the bumpers re-chromed, and a new vinyl top. But it's pretty much the same as it was when I drove it as a teenager. I call it my time machine. Every time I get behind the wheel, I'm 17 years old again.
Well, was it yellow?
Yep. It's yellow, that bright yellow. It's
And it
still
was that originally?
Yeah, that bright yellow.
Mm.
And I want to hang on to it. It's already in my will to give to my grandson. So as part of my retirement, I look forward to tinkering on it with him. And I remember he was probably only about 4 or 5 years old, but I had him help me change the oil in it and lube it and all that.
Well, I hope he appreciates that gift, because that's my era too, and
Right.
it looks very it is like a time machine. Takes
It
me
is.
back.
Yeah, it is. It is.
And the original DeLorean, huh?
Yeah. John DeLorean designed the 71-72 Grand Prix. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, it has one of the longest front ends in Detroit history. The hood just goes on and on and on,
It is quite impressive. So, this podcast is called Bloom Where You're Planted. And I always ask people, with one exception, I kind of let it slip by one time, but for the most part, I say, what does that quote mean to you?
Well, okay. Well, knowing that many believe its biblical origin is from 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 20, each person should remain in the situation they were in when God called them. So, Laura, I think in my case, most of the evidence in my case suggests I'm a late bloomer. You asking me that takes me back to about 20 years ago. It's Father Days, and I'm watching the NBC Today show, and it's featuring Lexington native and author Neil Chetnick and his recently published book, Father Loss. I saw that show and went and bought his book, but each chapter of Father Loss is about sons Neil profiled who lost fathers at different phases of their lives. I can't recall exactly, but I think like chapter 2 is about a son who lost their fathers before they were born. Chapter 3 is about sons who lost their fathers when they were toddlers. And the next chapter is about sons who lost their fathers when they were my age, around 9 years old or so. And if I remember correctly, Neil wrote that sons in my age group we either grow up to be losers, misfits, drug addicts, alcoholics, or whatever, living lives with no direction, or overachievers, perfectionists, because we have the attaboy complex. We never remember, or we never got the attaboys sons should get from their fathers. So we're constantly overachieving, wanting to hear the attaboys we never received from dead fathers. Well, when I heard that and read that, Neil nailed me. Throughout my career, I've done, as you already mentioned, I've done a lot of different things, and cabinet maker, carpenter, military policeman, correctional officer, and I didn't mention I was a criminal justice planner for an A&E firm designing jails and correctional facilities, and I have 5 degrees. So the point I'm making is that I feel like I've done many different things, and I feel like I've done well with each of them, but I was always constantly wanting to try something new. But really only until recently, after undergoing lots of counseling, have I realized that I've been searching for myself all these years, trying to get the attaboy from a father I never got a chance to really know. And I never underwent counseling, but I guess how I got there was, I went to Vietnam, and I found the crash site of my father's plane, which is a fascinating story in of itself. And my siblings came over, and we had a memorial service, or rather an Episcopal burial service, since over half of my father's remains were never recovered. And although my siblings got a sense of peace after that service, I didn't. And I sensed my father didn't either. And I felt the two of us still had too many unanswered questions. But so I came back from Vietnam with all these questions. So I actually underwent about 20 hours of counseling sessions. And I slowly learned that this quest of mine that I've been working on for over 30 years has not only been about finding out who my father was, but also the relationship I had with his loss. The search for my father has been a search for myself. And even if I don't get the last answer in terms of finding out what actually happened to him and why, I can say I know my father now. I know who I am because of him. And I feel fortunate in that respect. And, not many sons ever get the chance to know and to be mentored by their dead fathers as I have. And in my book, I do write about the relationship I've developed with my father, and how I sense he's guiding me and seeking the truth and living a good and complete life. And so in that respect, I feel like I've finally found myself, and that I finally feel comfortable in the situation in which God called me. I now know myself because I know my father. And perhaps the goal of my odyssey, this quest I've been on for decades, wasn't to find the absolute truth, but to direct my life toward being a more complete man and a better Christian. So I think I finally sprouted.
Wow, you really shared with us your journey. And it seems like such an amazing journey, but you have seen it. You've experienced it, but you knew it. And so many people, I think, don't realize, they don't put the pieces together, but you have, and that's amazing.
Wow.
I know, when we talk about giving words of wisdom to people about, you've done many, many things, but if you had one thing that you wanted to, well, it doesn't even have to be one thing, but if you wanted to share, what words of wisdom would you give someone that's done or is doing what you have done? What would you tell them?
I guess that's a difficult question for me to answer. I guess the bottom line is I wouldn't want anyone to be placed in the situation I was, but And I will say a little bit about my memoir. I do write about the terrible toll my quest has taken on my family, especially on Brenda, my wife, and I never will forget what she told me one evening a few weeks before I left to go to Vietnam, and she told me that something to the effect that these letters of my father that I found a quarter century after his death that have altered my life and everyone's life connected to me, and my mother couldn't be the parental guide because she was lost in pain, and that's why I became so dependent upon my father's letters. And but I remember her saying, there's a void in my heart that you should be able to fill, but you can't fill it because you're too busy trying to fill the void in your own heart with the love of a dead father you barely knew. And she's been so right, and for a long time, I thought about naming my book Postmarked Angels and Demons. I was wed to that because the letters have been both blessings and curses, but it's too close to Dan Brown's Angels and Demons. I've since come up with other titles, but I do want to share with your listeners that as a result of my quest and my trip to Vietnam, I've learned so much, especially from the Vietnamese. And I think this is a lesson for all of us. I found it incredible that the Vietnamese people can move forward, especially all they have suffered from the war with us. And Vietnamese today are still suffering and dying from the effects of Agent Orange and unexploded ordnance, that they're accidentally bumping into or picking up or whatever. And I was amazed with the Vietnamese. My interpreter, his father, fought for the National Liberation Front, and he was decorated multiple times, and even had the nickname the American Slayer for killing 7 American soldiers in close combat. And this man helped me in so many ways. And his father, my interpreter's grandfather, he was arrested and held in a South Vietnamese prison. And none of his family knew he was in prison and assumed he was dead. So his wife remarried. And his brother, my interpreter's uncle, was killed by Americans, and he's in an unmarked mass grave somewhere. But this is just one example. But I find it so ironic that despite all the damage the U.S. did to the Vietnamese, they go out of their way to help me and other Americans, find the site of lost ones. And this man helped me find and interview surviving communist fighters who eventually led me to my father's plane crash. But I find it amazing that Vietnamese from all walks of life, they have no grudges against the U.S., and they all believe in moving forward and focusing on the people that are most important to us, the people who are living. And so, in my case, has my odyssey for the truth been worth it? For most of my life, I feel like I haven't been able to move forward and leave the past behind me. It's taken a huge toll on my family and me. And who knows what my life would have been like had I been focused on the future and left the past and not looked at it in the rearview mirror. But then again, look what I've learned and gained as a result. Had I not started my quest for the truth, my family and others would never have learned about government lies and to cover up my father's death. They wouldn't have learned about my father's character, morality, and actions. And even more importantly, I never would have developed this relationship with my father that I have now. So, in some, I can't recommend that others do as I have done, but in my case, I can recommend that anyone who's experienced trauma like my family has and is seeking answers to what they feel is unresolvable questions to seek professional help, counseling, or at a minimum, simply talk to others. I did, but only after returning from Vietnam. And I guess other therapy I would recommend is to have a passionate hobby or activity to soothe your mind and occupy your thoughts. And that's why I do, enjoy woodworking and gardening and beekeeping. I think we all need outlets like that. So I guess that's a long story, but that's my advice.
You're a wonderful storyteller too. That's not on your list, but you are. You are. So I'm sure your book is going to be a great success when you complete it. So what is next for you? You're talking about retiring.
Yeah. I'm
That's
looking.
one thing.
Yeah, my goal is to retire once I have a publishing contract. And I want to focus my energies on getting the book in print, promoting and marketing it. And my wife and I have plans for traveling. I'd like to travel throughout the U.S. and Vietnam and conduct presentations and readings and interviews and just talk with any interested parties. And I'd like to, visit bookstores and book clubs and festivals, libraries, churches, even VFWs, schools, college campuses. I've already had preliminary conversations with officials in Vietnam who are accepting of the project and familiar with publishing and doing book tours and book launches there. And I want to continue to write. In my MFA program, I started a screenplay based upon my memoir, as well as wrote a couple of 10-minute plays. After retirement, I want to write a 3-act play that focuses on my father's letters and how they contributed to a 20-year relationship between him and my mother. And believe it or not, it's an incredible love story. Most of these letters are love letters, over 400 of them. And my parents are polar opposites of each other, And provided there's interest, I'd like to be involved in writing a screenplay, or perhaps, I even envision a musical. I want to do a podcast similar to those that appear on true crime. I also see the opportunity for a sequel to my book.
Mm-hmm.
Should I obtain the funds, I'd like to exhume my father's remains and have them subjected to a detailed forensic examination, including DNA analysis and an MRI. And I think what I find may confirm my theory about what really happened and what I write about. That could be in a book sequel.
Right. Technologies that weren't available at the time.
Right. You're absolutely right. And my book is based upon my father's letters when he and my mother are physically apart. But I do recall a few years when he was at home, and he was the provost marshal for the U.S. Army Engineer Division, South Atlantic. And he oversaw law enforcement investigations of crimes occurring on Corps property, including its 6 districts in Cape Kennedy, Charleston, Jacksonville, Mobile, Savannah, and Wilmington. And this is the early 60s. And his office is investigating bootlegging, moonshining, gambling operations, car theft rings, and the lynching of African Americans. It's occurring on federal property. And it's rumored the Dixie Mafia even took out a contract on him because his investigations were interfering so much with their operations. And so I'd like to continue to research and write about my father more, and its focus included corroborating these stories, which I think are pretty interesting.
Oh, absolutely. Well, James, it's been an absolute delight to go through your story. I just feel like mesmerized, just fixated on so many details of your life and your story. And I'm sure that people are really going to get a lot out of it because, and it just really does feel like to be continued. All of the things that you're doing, and that's a really wonderful thing that you're able to share some really painful things.
Yeah, it has been painful, but hopefully others can learn from from the pain we've suffered from, and as well as the peace we're trying to obtain. And I think I'm going to get there eventually.
Well, again, so thank you so much for being a guest. And I think our time has about come to a close. And I want to thank you for sharing all of your information. And I'm sure that we will be catching up soon, because it is a stay tuned sort of story. So this is the Bloom Where You're Planted podcast, sponsored by Never Too Late Cafe. I'm Laura Womack, your host, and I'm saying bye for now. Thanks again, James.
Thank you, Laura. It's been a pleasure.